Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Rewriting the Story. I'm Dr. Teresa A. Smith, Dr. Taz. This is our final conversation in this series. And before we begin, I want to thank you so much for spending this time with me over the past weeks. It has been a labor of love, and I hope that it has proven beneficial to you. We've talked about recognizing when something no longer fits. We talked about making decisions that reflect who we are becoming instead of who we've always been. We've talked about taking action, even when the outcome is uncertain and sometimes we're shaking in our boots. Today, I want us to think about something we rarely celebrate, those ordinary days, because I believe ordinary days tell us more about our story than those extraordinary moments ever will. Anyone can make one courageous decision. The real question is what happens after the excitement is over? What happens when no one is watching anymore? What happens when living differently becomes the way we live? That is where I want us to spend our time today. Let me introduce you to Renee. Several years ago, Renee felt like she was living the same week over and over and over. It was a Groundhog Day. Every Monday looked like the Monday before it. Every conversation sounded familiar. Every decision seemed to come from that same place. Nothing about her life looked unhealthy. She was responsible. Folks trusted her. She kept her commitments. So from the outside, everything looked steady. But on the inside, she felt as though she had quietly disappeared into the routines that kept everyone else comfortable. Over time, she began making small changes. Stop apologizing every time she expressed a preference. Started protecting one evening each week for herself. Pause before automatically saying yes. She became more thoughtful about where her time and energy were going to go. None of the choices didn't make the headlines, but people, most of them, they didn't even notice. But months became years. And one afternoon, a friend said something that kind of caught Renee off guard. I know you've heard it before. You seem different. Renee smiled. Different how? Lighter? She laughed then. I think I finally stopped trying to become someone else. I think I stopped trying to become someone else. The interesting part was what happened next. She drove home thinking about the conversation. You know how we are. For the first time, Renee realized she had not thought about changing her life in months. Not because she wasn't still growing, but because living differently had become the new normal. So she didn't have to think about changing her life. That part of Renee's story is what stayed with me. She did not wake up one morning and announce that she had finally arrived. She noticed that the life she had been intentionally building had become the life she was now living. I wonder how many of us expect to feel some huge change. The reality is so different. It's not like the movies, and I love a good movie, but it's not like that. The healthiest changes often become so ordinary that we seldom even notice them. Not because they stop mattering, because they become a part of us. I think about, when our doctors sometimes tell us to exercise. I remember some years back, I was really exercising every day. I had a routine. Something happened. I had some sort of injury that happened. And so my exercise routine got interrupted because I couldn't use the machines at the gym. I remember my mother saying that my dad said to her, "What's wrong with her?" And I'm like, okay, because I didn't understand. Well, what had happened over time, because it was a slow change, like the doctors tell us, exercise every day, was something slowly changes within us. Physically, we may become more fit. Well, for me, my emotional wellness was better. And it was only after my mother said that, and I thought about it, I'm like, oh, I'm not exercising anymore. So my emotional intelligence, my ability to contain my emotions or to manage my emotions or not to respond a certain way had been diminished. I didn't realize that by me going to the gym every day, that it was making a change with my emotional well-being. I was going there to help me physically, but bit by bit, it was changing other parts of me. And before I realized it had become my new norm, which was what my father was accustomed to. And then all of a sudden, I wasn't reacting, I wasn't responding the same way. He knew it, he saw it. I didn't realize it because my new normal had been interrupted. So with Renee, it's like, oh, it wasn't something that just happened overnight, like in the movies. It was a slow thing. And there she was living the life. It was the new normal. So she didn't have to think about changing anything anymore. So the recognition doesn't happen only once. Because once my mother brought it to my attention that my father was like, "What's wrong with her?" Then I became aware, oh, you are responding differently. And I thought, oh, you really need to go and exercise. That makes a difference for you. I didn't realize it. So recognition doesn't happen only once. It's a continual thing. Sometimes we recognize how far we've come by looking backwards instead of forward. Because that's what I did. I'm like, oh, I am behaving differently. Sometimes another person notices our growth before we do. My dad had noticed I wasn't as emotional as I used to be. I didn't know it. Recognition keeps us connected to the story we're continuing to write. Recognition keeps us connected to the story we're continuing to write. One of the biggest decisions we ever make is deciding to continue. Remember, once my dad, it was brought to my attention, it's like, oh, I got to start exercising. And I got back in the gym once I was cleared medically, because I then became aware. I recognized, oh, I was different, not just physically, but emotionally. I liked the physical changes that were happening, and I liked those emotional changes. So my decision was, oh, I need to continue that whenever I'm physically able to do so. Not because it felt easy, but because the life that I had built deserved consistency. And I owed it to myself. I deserved that. I deserve that consistency. You deserve that consistency. The quiet decisions to continue often shape us more than the ones that people see in the headlines, people see on social media. Those quiet decisions, they shape us more because they're more intimate. They're not being shared with others. This framework uses 3 simple words: recognition, decision, and then action. Not because life moves neatly from one to the next. It just don't happen that way. Because they're continually shaping one another. So they're intertwined. We recognize, we decide, we act. We decide, we recognize, we act. They're always interchanging. They're bouncing off of each other simultaneously. Then life gives us something, you know how life is, new to recognize. Oh my goodness. The cycle continues throughout our lives. It's a continuous cycle because we're continuing to evolve. We're continually to refine this new normal. We're continually rewriting our story with every experience, whether it's a positive experience or it's maybe not so positive. But we learn the lessons from both. We recognize, then we decide, then we act. One morning, I'll tell you, if you talk about Renee here for a moment. One morning, Renee was making eggs before work. Nothing unusual. She looked out the window and she smiled. Not because something extraordinary had happened, because she realized she no longer was waking up wondering when her life would finally begin. She was already living it. That was quiet clarity, to know that you ain't waiting on your life. You are already living your best life. That's what we call clarity. Later that week, someone asked if she could take on another responsibility. Now, we got to make some healthy choices here. She thought about it. She smiled. Then she answered honestly, I can't do that right now. Let me repeat that for the people in the back. I can't do that right now. She didn't feel guilty, didn't over-explain it, respected both the request and her own capacity at that moment in time. Now, years earlier, you know what the answer would have been almost immediately. We all know. Yes. Not now. She simply reflected who she had become. Renee was no longer that old version of herself. She was living her life. And her answer just reflected who she was. That was an honest choice based on who she was at that moment in time. Months later, she found an old journal. You know how that is if you're a journaler. You pick up your journal, it's like, okay, what was I thinking back on that particular day? Inside, she read pages filled with questions. Why do I feel exhausted? Why do I keep saying yes when I want to say no? Will I ever feel like myself again? Well, now she smiled, not because every problem had disappeared, because she realized she no longer asked those questions every day. The rewrite had become her normal life. It won't perfect, it won't finish, but she was simply living her new normal. One of the reasons rewriting the story is the fourth pillar of the Stronger Transformation Framework is because this is where everything begins working together. Sometimes we revisit what anchors us. We rediscover parts of our identity. Sometimes we have those difficult conversations, that real talk with ourselves that help us notice when we are drifting. Because we all drift to the left or to the right sometimes. But then we choose again. And we don't do this once, guys. We don't do it once because we're human beings. We do it over and over and over again. That is rewriting your story. Not replacing who we are, but living more honestly as we are becoming. As we finish this series, I want to leave you with one question. If someone who knew you 3 years ago spent an ordinary afternoon with you today, what quiet change might they notice that you no longer think about? If someone who knew you 3 years ago spent one ordinary afternoon with you, what quiet change might they notice that you no longer think about? Sit with that question. Sometimes the greatest evidence that we've grown is not what we celebrate. It is what has quietly become natural. Thank you for inviting me in your life through these conversations and through all of the work I do. Through Stronger and Transformation and my platforms on IG, Dr. Taz Network, on IG, Facebook, and YouTube. My hope has never been that you would leave this series with all the answers. My hope has been that you would leave with a greater compassion for yourself as your story continues to unfold. Life will ask new questions of all of us. There'll be moments when you need to return to what anchors you, and that is different for everybody. Moments when you have to go and find your voice again. You have to rediscover it. You got to identify it again. Those moments when that honest conversation, the real talk, help you to recognize that something needs your attention. Then there will be moments when you choose differently. When you choose differently. Not because someone told you what to do, because you recognize that the story that you are living can continue growing with you. That is the invitation of rewriting the story. Not to become someone else, but to live with enough intention that your choices begin reflecting the life you're truly trying to build. Thank you for allowing me to walk beside you through these 4 conversations. Remember this: recognition opens the door. Decisions choose the destination, and action writes the next sentence. Over time, these sentences become a life, the life that you don't have to wonder about anymore, the life that you actually live. And because it becomes ordinary, you don't have to celebrate it because it is your life and you're living it each day to its fullest. So we all know the drill. We're going to live the story that we each choose through recognition, through decisions, and through action. Because we're going to write our life one sentence at a time. And when we do that, we are going to be in a position to take care of someone else. So remember, write your life a sentence at a time before you go trying to take care of someone else.